But before that, we have our governor, RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan addressing the BANCON in Mumbai. Let's cut across the live right now.
Facing the demographic tax of having to pay for an increasingly elderly population with a shrinking workforce. Much of the world has run out of easy paths to growth. Having built infrastructure everywhere and exploited natural resources to their fullest, many countries are left now with building bridges to nowhere to stimulate growth. Much of the world is also well educated, well fed, and well connected through roads, telecommunications, and finance. Now, India is unlike the rest of the world. Our population is young, our infrastructure inadequate, and too many Indians are poorly educated, poorly fed, and poorly connected. But that is precisely why our low-hanging opportunities for betterment are plentiful in the coming years. All we need to do is to pluck them. So, if it is so easy, why aren't we there already? This is an important question, but I don't want to go into the political economy of underdevelopment today. Suffice it to say that India is battling the internal interests that held it back in the past. While victory is not assured, we have made sufficient progress that we can look ahead to what we need to do in the next few years to put ourselves firmly back on the path of strong and sustainable growth. Now, some would say we need to focus on manufacturing. Others point to the industries we do not have, such as electronics or computer chips, and say that is what we need. Echoes of industrial planning seem to be heard once again in the corridors of power. I'm worried because we seem to be reverting to a dialogue of protection and subsidies that we left behind long ago. Our industrial sector is no longer an infant that needs to be mollycoddled. While we should not enter into free trade agreements that give foreign manufacturers an undue advantage, that is no reason for us now to respond by giving domestic manufacturers protection. We must remember that one domestic producer's advantage from protectionist profits is paid for by the consumer or shows up as another domestic producer's cost disadvantage. Instead of targeting specific industries for governmental attention, which risks bringing back all the baggage of the license permit Raj that we left behind, let us focus instead on improving the conditions for growth for all. Our measure of success should be the jobs that are created not by giving government subsidies or protections to labor-intensive industries or sectors, but by developing a facilitating, though competitive environment that will result in the emergence of the best solutions. This requires a disciplined focus on 4 issues, at least. Number 1, we need to improve the quality of our infrastructure, especially the logistical support and power that industry and services need. Grand plans are on the anvil, such as the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. We need to complete such projects on time and within budget. The success of the New Delhi Metro suggests that timeliness and cost control are not foreign to the Indian psyche. Second, our youth need education and training for the jobs that will be created. Some of this will be higher degrees, not just computer science, but also design or civil engineering or even the fine arts. Some of it will be appropriate vocational education that teaches them to be good plumbers and electricians rather than unemployable, low-skilled engineers. Teaching our citizens can be a stepping stone to teaching the world. India can be at the forefront of providing mass technology-enabled education laced with appropriate human inputs to the rest of the world. Third, we need better business regulation. This does not always mean less regulation, but it means regulation that is appropriate to the objective and that is enforced. I'm told today that factories in one state still require, are still required to have a snake trap on the factory floor by law, a law that has not been changed since the days that factories were surrounded by jungles. This lack of change may be sheer inertia, but it also may be more sinister rent-seeking. All too often we have too much regulation on the books and too little regulation in practice, with the worst of the regulated finding unscrupulous ways around the regulation while the honest are stymied. We have strong labor laws in theory that are meant to protect employees, but in practice we have a very flexible system with no incentive for firms to invest in their workers or to hold on to them, and no loyalty towards the firms from workers. This needs to change if we are to have more skilled manufacturing jobs. And number 4, we need a better financial system which will finance the needed infrastructure and the expansion of every producer, ranging from the kirana shop owner to the industrialist, even as it allows households to save safely with positive real returns, to insure themselves against health emergencies or old age costs, or borrow at low cost to finance consumption. Importantly, the financial system should not require constant subsidies to bail it out. In the rest of this talk, I want to focus on what we at the Reserve Bank are doing to improve the financial system. We plan to build the Reserve Bank's developmental measures over the next few quarters on 5 pillars. These are: first, clarifying and strengthening the monetary policy framework; second, strengthening banking structure through new entry, branch expansion, encouraging new varieties of banks, and moving foreign banks into better regulated organizational forms; third, broadening and deepening financial markets and increasing their liquidity and resilience so that they can help allocate and absorb the risks entailed in financing India's growth; 4, expanding access to finance to small and medium enterprises, the unorganized sector, the poor, and the remote and underserved areas of the country through technology, new business practices, and new organizational structures, some of which you see around you displayed in this conference. We need more and better financial inclusion. And number 5, and perhaps an important aspect at this time, we need to improve the system's ability to deal with corporate distress and financial institution distress by strengthening real and financial restructuring as well as debt recovery. Let me elaborate a little on these measures before concluding. We are among the large countries in the world with the highest consumer price inflation, even though growth is weaker than we would like it to be. Much of the inflation is concentrated in food and services, though yesterday's WPI numbers suggest there's some in intermediate goods also. Our households are turning to gold because they find financial investments unattractive. At the same time, many of your clients, many industrial corporations, are complaining about high interest rates because they cannot pass through their higher costs into higher prices for their products. We can spend a long time debating the sources of this inflation, but ultimately inflation comes from demand exceeding supply. We need to reduce demand somewhat without having serious adverse effects on investment and supply. This is a balancing act which requires the RBI to act firmly so that the economy is disinflating, even while allowing the weak economy more time than one would normally allow for it to reach a comfortable level of inflation. The weak state of the economy, as well as the good Kharif and Rabi harvest, will generate disinflationary forces that will help, and we await data to see how these forces will play out. No single data point or number will determine our next move. I think the market understands what we are trying to do, but we need a more carefully spelled out monetary policy framework than we currently have. We have a committee currently which is studying this. The Dr. Urjit Patel committee will report by the end of December 2013, and we will take actions following that report. We have already announced measures to free bank branching and to incentivize foreign banks to incorporate domestically. Going forward, we have to give our public sector banks, which are a national asset, the means to improve their competitiveness. Many of them have made enormous strides in the last decade. For instance, the extent to which they have digitized their operations, adopted core banking solutions, is extremely praiseworthy. But because competition in the banking sector is likely to increase in the next few years, our public sector banks cannot rest on their laurels. In the coming months, we will discuss with stakeholders in the public sector banks about what needs to be done to help them improve their stability, efficiency, and productivity. I have said we need to enlist markets we need to deepen them, we need to make them more resilient, but ultimately we need to enlist them in the aid of banking. Liquid markets will help banks offload risks they should not bear, such as interest rate or exchange risk. They will also allow banks to sell assets they have no comparative advantage in holding, such as long-term loans to completed infrastructure projects, which are better held by infrastructure funds, pension funds, and insurance companies. Large and liquid markets will help promoters raise equity, which is sorely needed in the Indian economy to absorb the risks that banks otherwise end up absorbing. Rather than seeing markets as being inimical to the development of the banking sector, we have to see them as complementary. Of course, this requires many of you bankers to build on your risk management capabilities so that you can use the markets effectively and safely. In the coming weeks, we will roll out more recommendations of the Gandhi Committee report to improve the liquidity and depth of the GSEC market. Once we feel more comfortable with the GSEC market, we will turn to money markets and then to corporate debt markets. We will introduce new variants of interest rate futures and products like inflation index certificates. Those are already on the anvil, but we'll also look at other products. And we will continuously work to improve liquidity in the derivative markets and foreign exchange markets. We have to reach everyone, however remote or small, with financial services. Financial inclusion does not just mean credit for productive purposes. It means credit for healthcare emergencies or to pay for lumpy school or college fees. It means a safe means of remunerated savings and an easy way to make payments and remittances. It means insurance, it means pensions, it means financial literacy and consumer protection. We have made great strides in inclusion, but we are still some distance from our goal. We've adopted a branch-based strategy for inclusion, but it's not enough. Too many poor people in so-called overbanked areas, typically urban areas, still do not have access to banking services. We have many experiments underway to use technology, again, like we've seen on display today, to use technology like mobile phones, new products such as mobile wallets, and new entities such as a variety of business correspondents to link people up to the formal financial system. Much as with cell phones, where we created a frugal Indian model, we need a frugal, trustworthy, and effective Indian model for financial inclusion. The Dr. Nachiket More Committee is helping us think through possible models, and I'm hopeful that when we outline measures based on its recommendations, our fine banks, NBFCs, IT companies, and mobile players will create that truly significant and distinct model. At a more detailed level, we have set up committees like the Sambamurthy Committee to advise us on how to expand mobile banking in India through encrypted SMS-based funds transfer in any type of handset. I could go on the details. A number of committees are looking to see how we can harness technology. I should emphasize the need for banks like the ones represented in this room to move beyond simply opening bank accounts as a measure of inclusion to ensuring that poor customers are confident and comfortable enough to use them. Innovation in reaching out to the underserved customer, rather than simply posting higher numbers in branches opened or bank accounts opened, has to be part of our efforts. And last but not least, we have to deal better with financial distress. The natural and worst way for a bank management with limited tenure to deal with distress is to extend and pretend, to evergreen the loan, hope it recovers by miracle, or that one's successor has to deal with it. The natural incentive for a promoter to deal with distress is to hold on to equity and control despite having no real equity left, and to stand in the way of all efforts to resolve the underlying project while hoping for an act of God to bail him out. Not all promoters and not all bankers succumb to these natural incentives, but too many do. We have to ensure that the system recognizes financial distress early, takes steps to resolve it, and ensures fair recovery for lenders and investors. We could, of course, wish for a more effective judicial process or a better bankruptcy system. But while we await that, we have to improve the functioning of what we have. In the next few weeks, we will announce measures to incentivize early recognition, better resolution, and fair recovery of distressed loans. We will focus on putting real assets back to work in the best use, something the economy sorely needs. Here again, you bankers have a critical role to play by fighting the natural incentives that are built into the system. You have to help those with genuine difficulties while being firm with those who are trying to milk the system. The RBI will help you with every measure at our disposal. Let me conclude. We are going through a period of great cynicism about what India can do. That cynicism does not just permeate the foreign press and their audiences, but also infects our domestic debate. Every policy is greeted with suspicion and scrutinized for evidence of malfeasance. With no upside to making decisions, it is no wonder that decision-making has slowed, and by decision-making, I include also the genuine, legitimate process of taking risks in making loans that every banker has to undertake. We have to take those risks. Those risks cannot be viewed from an ex-post perspective based on whether the project succeeded or failed. The solution to this kind of environment, to dealing with it, cannot come through inaction, but through action. Action that is seen as purposeful, unbiased, and effective. No doubt mistakes will be made, but if the weight of clean actions builds up, the miasma of suspicion that pervades our society today will ebb. The Reserve Bank of India will play its part in making this happen. Thank you.
RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan there addressing the BANCON. We do remember Finance Minister P. Chidambaram talking about similar issues, inflation concerns, growth concerns, and many, many more concerns. More importantly, Raghuram Rajan making a statement that no single data point or number will determine RBI's next move. A very important point he made, and also talking about the bankers taking risks and how important it is to be proactive, and taking risks will be necessary in an environment like this where the Indian economy is facing challenging times. So on that note, we'll take a wrap on this edition of Business Day. More on the other side of the break.